It's 1955, and a young man needs surgery. He doesn't have any money, and so he ends up at Bellevue Hospital as an indigent patient, where he meets Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller gets to chatting with him and finds out that the young man is an immigrant, he's a veteran, he works long hours at a restaurant, and he doesn't have an education. Dr. Miller tells him that his prospects would be much better if he went to school, even if only to learn a trade. The surgery is successful, and afterwards the young man goes to school and becomes a draftsman. He goes on to have a family and a 31-year career with a firm here in Manhattan. Now, Dr. Miller's a physician. He's not a career coach. He's not a life coach. Yet he took an interest and gave a nudge that changed the trajectory of this young man's life. Why? What if you could wake up every morning knowing that people were looking to make your life a little bit better? And what if you could wake up every morning knowing that you could find somebody and make their life a little bit better? What would it be like to live in that world? We've used technology to change the way we do things, and we've created entirely new economies in the process. For example, in the sharing economy, sharing platforms make money off of the favors we used to do, like rides to the airport, a spare couch, even our power tools. It's estimated to be a $300 billion economy within 10 years. And what about the self-economy? Social networking platforms today make money off of our desire for attention. Almost 18 billion last year. That is real money for virtual likes. What if instead we could harness technology to make it easier for us to help one another with no strings attached, and where the only currency is gratitude? Now, I'm not an economist, and I'm not an expert on generosity, but at last year's reunion, a bunch of us from different years got together and were chatting about how can we help the school beyond just organizing a class gift every 5 years. And we also talked about the fact that we have some great alums. And we also talked about the fact that we have this strange affinity for Hunter and for each other, right? Wouldn't it be great if we could tap into some of that goodwill and make it easier for alums to help each other? And then I became curious. Why don't we do this more often? And what can we do about it? So I started asking people questions. And you don't make many friends at cocktail parties by asking, so why aren't you more generous? Are you selfish? Or just lazy? No, of course not. It was a lot more fun to ask people, hey, has somebody done something for you that's changed your life without expecting anything in return? And I was pleasantly surprised. People had great stories and were eager to share them. And I became convinced that as human beings, we have a desire, we're actually wired to want to help each other. And we're also seeking purpose. And I believe that purpose is when we take our best and highest use, the thing that we're really good at, the thing that we love to do, and we invest that in someone else. And a picture phrase came to mind. Pour your cup, that captures the very essence of that. And if we're successful in taking our best and highest use and investing that into someone else, that's a pour your cup moment. So, Roger is a classmate and a neurosurgeon in Atlanta. Now, if Roger wanted to volunteer some of his time to paint fences, that would be great. But his contribution would be the going hourly rate for painting fences. And the independent sector estimates the value of volunteer time at about $23 an hour. What if instead Roger could spend a couple of hours each week helping people through his specialized knowledge and experience, his specialized skill. For example, inspiring someone to go into medicine, discussing a novel surgical technique that ends up helping a patient years down the road. What then would be the value of his contribution? That's Roger's purpose. And what's going to happen when we create this culture of generosity? Well, for recipients, it changes everything. A young woman becomes an author because someone she looks up to asks her, "How's that writing coming?" A college dropout goes on to become a Grammy award-winning composer because a friend takes him out for a 4-hour lunch and convinces him to go back to school. A patient is institutionalized for a bipolar disorder and is rocking and crying on the floor and makes it through that first night because a nurse gives her a small kindness and her dignity. What about the givers? There is a growing body of evidence that links volunteering to better health and longer living. And in his book, Give and Take, Adam Grant divides people into 3 categories: givers, takers, and matchers. You know, the ones that try to balance out their giving and taking. And what does he find? He finds that givers are more likely to get ahead in their careers. So we feel better, we live longer, and we're more successful when we pour ourselves into others. And guess what? Happier, healthier, more successful people also make great employees. They're more engaged alums. So generosity is good for business, and it's good for organization. But there's an important caveat that I'll get to later. So here's the challenge. What we heard in the stories was that a lot of these pour your cup moments were serendipitous. They weren't necessarily random, but you could almost see how close they came not to happening. So how do we do that? One of my favorite stories is about Kevin Rathbun. Kevin Rathbun is a chef in Atlanta. Early in his career, Kevin was working for a restaurant group in Atlanta. But he wanted to open up his own place. So he and a couple of partners put together a plan to open up a large restaurant called Rathbun's in the middle of an up-and-coming neighborhood. They needed investors and would offer an equity stake in the business, plus returning the money within 4 years, plus interest. They must have pitched the plan to over 50 investors, and there were no takers. A chef opening up a restaurant for the first time in a neighborhood that couldn't get any worse, because that's what up-and-coming means, right? With a 4-year payback period in an industry where most restaurants fail within 3, where do we sign up? They were getting discouraged, but finally, Mike, the owner of an auto dealership in town, said yes. He would invest along with a friend of his. They opened up Rathbun's, and it was so successful, within 6 months, he's able to pay everyone back. He sits down with Mike, gives him back the money, plus the agreed interest, and Mike says, "Hey, I thought you said this was going to take 4 years." And Kevin said, "Well, we did a little bit better than we expected." Mike calls Kevin to lunch a couple of weeks later, gives him an envelope, and says, "You keep my equity share." And Kevin was blown away. At that moment, he realized that Mike didn't invest because he thought it was such a great investment opportunity. He invested because he wanted to give Kevin a shot at realizing his dream. He probably thought he'd never see that money again. As we go through the stories that we've heard, we think we've come up with 7 key ingredients to this culture of generosity. And in case you need to leave early, I'll throw them all up at once. Successful givers are choosy. There's common ground, there's trust, there's egalite. It's a gift, it's convenient, and there's gratitude. Generosity, like everything else, is a scarce commodity, and we want to make it count. I think you'd all agree that when it comes to money, Bill Gates probably has a pretty full cup. But if the richest man in the world gave every cent he had to everyone in the world, we'd each end up with about 10 bucks. So instead of smearing it around, the Gates Foundation pours billions into things like vaccine delivery and education. And successful givers are the same way. They want to make sure, whether they have a lot or a little, they want to make sure that the thing that they give is going to make a difference for the other person. In a lot of the stories, these pour your cup moments started from some common ground. If you remember, we wanted to start Pour Your Cup to try to make it easier for Hunter alums to help each other based on the connection that we had to Hunter. And we heard that over and over again. If people came from that school or that company or was referred by that person, I would take that call 100%. If you called me today and said, hey, I went to Hunter High School, or I'm somehow affiliated with Hunter High School, I might call you back. In the case of Kevin Rathman, it turns out that he and Mike both grew up in the Midwest, and we're now both living in Atlanta. Trust. Is this really for me, or is there something in it for the other person? Are they going to use discretion with the context that I give them? Are they who they say they are? It turns out in Kevin Rathman's case that Mike actually attended a charity event that Kevin was working, and so he was able to get a glimpse of his character and his generosity so that there was a basis of trust well before the investment opportunity. Égalité. So there's a notion out there that givers line up on one side and recipients line up on the other, and givers have all of the answers, and receivers are like, please, may I have more? But the French have this great term, égalité, and to me, it means that we all have something to offer. Let me give you an example. Liz Lee is Hunter 05, and she's actually a co-founder of Pour Your Cup. And as we were getting started, she was actually helping a current student with their resume for an internship. And at the same time, she was applying to business school, and so I was helping her with her essays. And I was starting Pour Your Cup, and I needed help with the technology, and somebody was helping me on how to build out Pour Your Cup. So you see, I believe that at every point in our lives, at any point in our lives, we have something to offer to others, and we could probably use a little help ourselves too. Gifts are unexpected delights with no strings attached. Aren't the best gifts the kind that you don't think of for yourselves and yet become our favorites? We heard in many of the stories, I think they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. They saw a life for me that I never dreamed I could have for myself. What would it be like to get a gift like that? What would it be like to give a gift like that? No strings attached. Has this ever happened to you? Every now and then, I'll want to do something really nice for my wife. Something really nice, like clean up the house. And just as I'm about to get started, she'll say, hey, if you're not doing anything, why don't you clean up your mess? It's ruined because it was a gift, now it's a chore. Right? Remember that caveat I told you about for business and for organizations? Well, here's the thing. Generosity can't be mandated and it can't be assigned. It's highly perishable. Once you cross over from encouraging to coercion, people haven't volunteered anymore. They've been voluntold. And then you get the bare minimum. Everything these days needs to be convenient, right? When somebody asks you for a favor, you go through this quick mental calculation. How long is it going to take? What else do I have to do? Do I have a good enough excuse not to do it? Right? So if it's not convenient enough, you end up doing something that's less valuable. Think neurosurgeons painting fences. Or worse, we do nothing at all. In many of the stories we heard, people began to realize that they had never actually thanked the other person. And it wasn't because they were ungrateful. It's because it might have been many years before they even realized what they had gotten or how valuable it was. And by that point, they had lost touch with the other person. They didn't even know in some cases if that person was still alive. And when you think about it, it really doesn't make any sense for them to try to repay that person. So the only currency in the generosity economy is thank you, and to pay it forward. So, are there any examples where we can use technology to help each other out? I think here's one, Be My Eyes. Be My Eyes is a platform that helps people who can't see. It connects people who can't see with volunteers all over the world through their phones. And they can use their phones to do things like read a document, or look in the pantry, or do something as simple as looking at the expiration date on a carton of milk. It actually lets people share their eyes for a few minutes with the people that need them. We want to do the same thing with Pour Your Cup, except instead of eyesight, we want to make it easier for people to be able to share their skill, their experience, their advice, their perspective with the people that need them. We've recently built out a proof of concept that incorporates the 7 ingredients that we just discussed before so that people can find a good match, engage and share what they have, and say thank you. And we want to make it easy enough so you can do this while you're online at the grocery store, or on the subway, or even from your couch. It's purpose at the push of a button. And this may sound a little bit grand, but what if we could all find just one other person to pour ourselves into? What would that world be like? How many likes could we get for that? Remember Dr. Miller in 1955, who gave a nudge to that young man? Well, that young man turns out to be my dad. And while I'm not an expert in generosity, I wouldn't be here without it. Thank you.